Good morning, Skip.
Good morning, Jordan. I'm just going out on YouTube now. I keep putting this chat in a weird place now. I don't know why they're doing that. So I have to break out a
pop-out window kind of thing.
Yeah, but
you got to find it first.
Yeah, there it is. I got it.
Yeah, I always joke when they upgrade. It's like, thanks, I can't play the piano anymore. How do I make the pencil touch the paper? Where'd you put it?
Yeah, that type of thing is always happening to me.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so here we are. We have one person watching on Zoom or YouTube this morning so far.
Excellent.
And maybe, well, at least I'm going to approach the end of this essay that I've been reading for the last 3 weeks, or no, 6 weeks. So this morning I'm going to be reading toward the end of Jung, Dr. Stephen Eisenstat's essay entitled The Quest for One's Own Red Book in the Digital Age. And it appears in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arzt. This is volume 3 of this series. Okay, and so last week we ended with the spiritual dream and the ineffable of the absolute unknowable. And so it's 8 o'clock in the east. Do you know where your children are? Here we are. So I'm going to first read about Dr. Eisenstat's trips to Montana. And so here we go. Please go ahead and just a minute. Here's Yuan. This is, I've been doing this for her mainly. So just give her a chance to get in. I thought I promoted her. Okay. All right. Good evening, Yuan. Welcome. So I'm beginning the last phase of this essay. And so here's how Dr. Aizenstat is moving toward the end. Each autumn for over 30 years, I have traveled to the Big Sky state of Montana, where I offer a week-long dream tending workshop and retreat at the Bee Bar Ranch. The retreat unfolds in the deep imagination of the open mountain landscapes. The natural beauty that surrounds us greatly enhances our art projects, storytelling, music, dance movement, yoga, as well as the tending of our dreams. This last fall, an early snow fell over the valley, making the bright yellows, radiant oranges, and fiery reds of the changing leaves even more dramatic. The panoply of color added its drama to our dream-sharing experiences. In one session, as I worked with a dreamer, the others listened while writing and drawing in their journals. There were a number of young people in their late 20s and early 30s, and most of them were chronicling their thoughts and experiences on tablets and iPads. For some, today's journals of choice. After the formal dream work, others were invited to come forward and share their art and reflections. One young woman showed us her interpretation of the living, moving, imaginal figures in the dream that she had drawn on her iPad using an Illustrator app and program. The animated images were alive, vital, and three-dimensional, and the figures were accompanied by an audio of the song that the dreamer had mentioned hearing in the dream. In a word, the whole visual interpretation was breathtaking. The dreamer, was deeply touched. "Thank you so much," she said. "No problem," the artist replied. "By the way, what is your email? I'm sending it to you right now." The Red Book has its own unique technological coming out story. In 2010, shortly before the original Red Book manuscript made its West Coast debut at UCLA's Hammer Museum, Pacifica Graduate Institute hosted a weekend immersion symposium in what experts gave presentations describing some of the many advanced print technologies that have been used to preserve the integrity of the original Red Book manuscript for W. Norton's publication. Highly advanced computer technologies have been utilized to faithfully restore and replicate the print, images, and artwork in Jung's original journals. Without the implementation of this extraordinary high-tech computer technology, the genius of the Red Book, which Jung described as the prima materia for a lifetime's work, might never have been preserved and made available to us. So I just like to talk about the prima materia for a moment. The prima materia is now chemical reference. It's obviously a Latin phrase, prima materia, and it means the base material for his life's work. And what's very interesting about the Red Book, well, first of all, let me talk about this dream seminar that Dr. Aizenstat went to. So he, being a gentleman probably a bit older than me, was used to doing things with pen and paper, as Dr. Jung was. And he was impressed by how things could be turned instantly into digital media today. And that, of course, speeds everything up, as we all know. And so what's happening when we're doing dream work, or any of this work, including the tarot that Jordan and I are working on Monday evenings, is that we're opening up your psyche to actually experience what's within you. And in order to do that, we look at pictures, we talk about things, we open up the imaginal space so that you can see yourself and see what might be going on in your psyche. And of course, you can do this by journaling or doodling, as we did last week in our demonstration or whatever. But Dr. Jung did this, obviously, and he did it in middle age. He was 37 or 38 when he began the Red Book process. And he commented that he had already achieved everything that he could want. He had a family with 5 children, a beautiful wife. He had a career, a beautiful home on the Lake Zurich, and he was respected all around the world. But there was something in him that was eating him, and what he came to understand was all this material that bubbles up from beneath. And so you can think of that as the individuation process. And the individuation process is how an oak tree becomes an oak tree, for example. If you take an acorn, which is the starting substance of an oak tree, and you plant it, that acorn already has within it everything that will be manifested by that oak tree in the acorn. And moreover, it knows how to become exactly that oak tree. So every oak tree is the same. We can recognize oak trees all over the world, and they all meet certain characteristics, just like we as human beings can meet certain characteristics and be known as human. And that's true of everyone, regardless of race, creed, or color. And so we recognize them as human, but then the individuality develops over a lifetime as you experience certain things. And so Dr. Jung felt something pushing up. And in the Red Book, as we know, in 1913, October the 12th, I believe, he had a vision of Europe being inundated with a flood. And he had 5 such visions between October 1913 and August 1st, 1914. And he didn't know what they meant. He thought he might be engaging in the development of a psychosis. He knew there was something coming up from his psyche, but he didn't know what. And he thought it, as a psychiatrist, he thought it might be the advance of a mental disease. But he said that on August the 1st, 1914, he was the happiest man alive because World War I began. And then he could see that his dreams and visions that he had had over the last 9 months were prefigurations of World War I, and that they were in everybody in Europe at that time. And that caused him to recognize the collective unconscious and the fact that we can pass things across generations, across national borders, whatever, unconsciously, entirely unconsciously. And sometimes the results manifest. For example, we had an election in the United States on November 3rd. Now, for the last 4 years, a lot of people have been very worried about the turn that the American government had taken, and many of our institutions were being challenged by people in authority for 4 years. And there was a foreboding in the unconscious and in the conscious mind of many of us. And we couldn't really put a figure on it, but we could manifest it. So on November the 3rd, we had an election, and it was manifested in a defeat for President Donald Trump. And so, and not only a simple defeat, but a landslide defeat, because not only did he lose the states that he lost, but in many of the so-called red states, the Republican Party lost much ground and almost lost the state of Texas and some other states that are extremely affixed on the GOP and Trumpian way of looking at the world, let's say. I consider their way of looking at it the American shadow, from my point of view. And it's Donald Trump is certainly my shadow, because I know that if I was in his position, I would more or less do the same things that he did. And that's my shadow, and I have to own it. In other words, I have to realize that's me if I were in his position, if I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth and had, just got away with everything through a lifetime. Sure, I might behave that way. And we really have to own it ourselves if we're going to understand ourselves and what we want. And Um, there's nobody but us. We humans are the only people, or the only beings that know we're alive and know also that we will die. And we are the only beings that have created a very rich civilization all over the world, albeit somewhat differently all over the world. And as the only ones alive, we have to enact the world that we want. Okay, if we want to have a certain type of world, then we must make it so. There isn't anybody else. There's no God up there in the sky that's Geppetto pulling your strings. There is God. Okay, there is God, and we're going to talk about that. But God is not what was sold by the Abrahamic religions for the last 3,000 years, 3,500 years. What they sold, and originally you can understand because they were early Iron Age men, and they could only describe what was happening to them in metaphorical ways, and they only had a certain amount of experience. And we have vastly more experience than those people had. And so they described it in the way that made sense to them. So when the Greeks started to talk about the Greek gods, certainly those are archetypal forces in the world, but they thought that they were physically present. They thought Zeus actually lived at the top of Mount Olympus, for example. And those gods do exist, and goddesses, they do exist, but they exist in our heart. They exist in our psyche. And so we must understand what they actually are. And so in modern categories of understanding, we have to understand that these are unconscious forces that we need to be aware of, and thereby learn to live our lives. So in the case of the oak tree is growing up. From the acorn, it knows how to become an oak tree, and it knows to become that specific oak tree. But if a limb gets cut off because of a power line going through the tree or something like that, the oak tree will just put out another limb and move on. And basically, that's a wonderful metaphor for what we're talking about in human psychology, and especially Jungian psychology, which is often dealing with trauma. In other words, we all have traumatic experiences in our lifetimes. We lose parents, we face wars, we're forced to do things we don't want to do by our governments, what have you, all these things. And we find a way around. And that was Dr. Jung's point, which is that life will find a way, given whatever situation you find yourself in. However you're blocked, you can find a way around it, and figure out how to live your life so it's a satisfactory and meaningful life to you. And so this conversation, such as it is, this lecture is precisely that from my point of view, because I found Dr. Jung's work 34, I guess, almost years ago now. And I found it very comforting and very useful in terms of a lot of things that happened to me to help me understand what was happening to me. And because of that fact, even though I've had many traumas and many setbacks in my life, which we all do, we all have those setbacks, then I was able to move on and put my mind around it. And we all need to do that, because I remember in 2008, for example, during the financial collapse. And many of us were put upon financially and economically. And a neighbor of mine had a very successful nursery business, selling plants and things. And when that collapse occurred, he was crushed. I was crushed. My business was crushed also. And but he went out in the lake and killed himself. He couldn't take the stress from that. And I had suicidal ideation at that time. That idea came to my mind, but I said, no, perish that thought. I'm saying this to myself, perish that thought. I want to see how this movie comes out, how my life comes out. And if I go kill myself, I'm not going to know what the result is. And so, I didn't do it, and I kept working very hard. I still am working very hard. I'm here with you starting at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, and I've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 months. And this activity gives my life meaning, but it doesn't mean that exactly what I'm doing should give your life meaning. What it means is this is the way I found to keep my life going and to live a satisfactory and meaningful life for me. And so I'll shut up for a minute and just ask if Jordan wants to make any comments on what I've said here.
I really resonate with that, with the perish that thought, because one concept I have is that anxiety is a noxious fiction. It's easy to latch onto, but it's a mirage. And my concept is that my vanity thinks I'd look better with a head than without one. So incoming, and it pops up on my radar, to the ego, to me, as awareness of fear, rather than hijacking the fear to be anxiety and become afraid. And at that point, that blip comes on the radar, I duck and I move on. I'm that tree that didn't lose the limb. But as you made great points with those intense traumas that we have, and that we engage to enact our way through them rather than out of them. I've had my own very, very deep and serious, intense ones. And 2 concepts that I keep always is, one, don't waste trouble. Instead of even if you get blown off the boat, climb back on and get your bearings. And don't look at what's wrong. Look at what's workable, because you will go your whole life looking at the not things and never finish. But if you look at the knot you need to tie to rig out that sail so it doesn't flap around and knock you off the sailboat again, you've got a solution. And that's the first step. I find that my concept of don't waste trouble, Jodorowsky took it 9 steps further, when his chariot spoke, and he said, I made a diamond out of my misfortune.
Sure.
And the reason I resonate with that is, in the most harsh times, the nay I walk through the valley of the shadow of, dark shadow of life and soul times, those intense pressures push and compress at the very base of our depths. And I find that then they create those diamonds to then eject them back up into our life. So it's like a singularity to me that gets so dense, it has to release energy.
Yeah.
And there's a source of light there, I find, in embracing trouble, when finding the workability. So that I love when you said perish that thought. That's what I say to anxiety. And it is difficult at first for people to turn into trouble, to face the gunfire, so to speak. And I don't recommend anyone run into it. I'm just that kind of person. But it's the kind of thing where when you're swimming upstream like a fish, the food comes to you.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, the 2 things: don't waste trouble, and Jodorowsky's I made a diamond out of my misfortune misfortune really, really speak, I think, to this process in a way that's applicable. And people can find out how that can work in their life if they just take a sketch and look at it.
Right. So one of the metaphors that I have used on this YouTube channel is this one, where we all live in chaos. We all have a ball of chaos. And as long as we're in that little red ball and totally overtaken by it, we can't decide what to do with our lives. And so everything that I do in terms of this YouTube channel is intended to give my viewers and subscribers a way to pull out of that chaos and to look at it objectively and see where they are, and then you can decide how to move on from it. So that when Dr. Jung talks about the prima materia of a lifetime's work, well, of course, he was already a professional psychiatrist and had been practicing for 15 years, but he didn't consider that the prima materia. What he was doing was experimenting upon himself so that he could understand what is happening to everybody. And so that's what the Red Book is his withdrawing from the world and going through this imaginal series of events in the Red Book in order for him to understand how the psyche works. And so other forms of psychology depend on statistics, but statistics don't tell you anything, and they can be quite wrong. But what Dr. Jung is talking about here is this is how your psyche really works. and so if you can understand that, you can then go on with your life. And so what I know after many years of Jungian study is that, if I get upset or, something happens to me, I can pick up any Jungian text, anything at all, and even things that are tangentially related to it, and start reading. And within one or two sentences, I can relax and I can go on to live my life. And of course, many people use scripture like this. They use the Bible, and if they or they use the Bhagavad Gita or what have you, depending upon where you live in the world. But they use a scripture to step out of the chaos and to step into the world of your unconscious, how you're living in the world, so that you can make the proper decision about what you're going to do in the next 5 minutes even. And so when Dr. Jung did this 5-year experiment on himself, he was learning how his psyche worked, how it interacted. It does interact in images, and it interacts with personifications of various things that he had learned over a lifetime, many of which he didn't even know he learned. So the result was that wise men came to him, Elijah came to him, Philemon came to him in his active imagination. And of course, they were figments of his imagination, but they were quite real and are quite real, because things in your imagination are real, and they can influence all kinds of things. So anyway, that's what Prima Materia is about.
Skip, if I may, just quickly on Prima Materia, something that just came to me. The Red Book is, of course, Jung's Prima Materia. That wasn't new, but the DSM came to mind. And it was interesting to me is the contrast.
Jordan, you can't use a term like DSM unless you're going to explain it. This is a basic course for people who do not understand the English language as their prime language. So,
okay, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Psychiatry. It's the
what
list,
is the significance of it?
The list of all the different mental illnesses and mental disorders. And that outline is in one sense simply an insurance coding manual, or a bad gift to give a hypochondriac. But then if I look at that and put that as its piece of gravel, so to speak, but I take the wonderful Mount Rainier of the Red Book, and there's a difference there where then that diagnostic manual, psychiatry, becomes not even so much reference. It's then you can turn to the Red Book as an example of what one other really enacting, engaging human being has done to self-discover their life.
Right, exactly. And the Red Book is his life, not yours, not mine. I had an experience like the Red Book 16 years before it was published, and so I knew that these figures in your imagination are quite real because I had experienced that myself. The difference was that I didn't have the benefit of being a psychiatrist, and so I didn't know what was happening to me, and I was basically possessed by my anima for 8 months, and I worked my way through it, and without mental health professionals, but it was quite an experience. I put it in my drawer for 16 years, and I only published it in 2014 after I knew what it was and could understand it. But that was after lots of study of Dr. Jung's work. So it was in my drawer for 21 years before I actually published it. So Aizenstat goes on, cutting-edge software and highly advanced print technology have played leading roles in delivering Jung's enlightening reflections from the Red Book to the world. Countless visitants in dreams possess a hybrid quality that originates from the confluence of cyber and the innate sources. Virtual realities are becoming increasingly more sophisticated, creating computer avatars that are sentient and sympathetic. Virtual images and psychically generated images are less distinguishable and more interactive with each other. The question is posed, can avatars that exist in virtual and augmented realities be experienced as living images of dreams and imagination? Can the spirits of the depths in the Red Book be illuminated technologically as avatars to reveal the blood soul of Jung's original phantasmagorical world in an interactive, multidimensional experience for today's readers? His answer is no, I suspect not, but only not yet. Okay, so Dr. Aizenstat is the founder of Pacifica Graduate Institute. He's the chancellor of it, and he does not envision what could happen as yet. But just last night when we spoke to Dr. Kylie Laughlin on this YouTube channel, and you'll find his presentation right next to this on the playback, he was talking about doing the Red Book as a graphic novel. And I think that that's a terrific idea because it will be more approachable by young people so that they can more easily get into the Red Book. The Red Book is not easy reading, and I don't recommend that you begin study of Jungian psychology by reading the Red Book because very likely it will be way over your head. and you won't really appreciate what's happening there. But if you're a beginner, I recommend that you read Man and His Symbols, which is a book that I read 30 years ago, and Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is Dr. Jung's memoir of his own individuation. So he wasn't interested in writing a memoir with dates and on this date I did this and then I did this and that sort of thing. He wanted people to understand how he actually developed psychologically. And that book and the Red Book, both of them, were only half the story, because when they were published, they were, let's say, the contents was restricted by the family of C.G. Jung. And so now, just a month ago, on October the 13th, we have the new publication of the Black Books. And so if you don't know, let me, I'm going to change my cloak here so that you can have the Black Books behind me and appreciate what I'm talking about. So these books behind me now are the Black Books, and they're actually the Prima Materia of the Red Book, because these were the books that Dr. Jung actually wrote in when he was doing his experiments. And so what these 7 volumes have in them is actual photocopies of the Black Books, the official psychiatric notes that he was taking on himself. Those are all present in the Black Books in German, but after the photocopies, then there's Dr. Shamdasani's translation. And so as you see, it's Notebooks of Transformation, where he was taking his original notes. So that is a much clearer statement of what was really going on in Dr. Jung's material. And as you see, it's quite a bit more voluminous than the Red Books themselves. And it was only a month ago that they became available to us, thanks to a decade of work by Dr. Shamdasani. And there's another book that's due to come out very soon. I don't know exactly when. It's called The Protocols. And what the Protocols is Anyala Yaffe's notes that she took when Dr. Jung was telling him his stories for Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And that in German runs to 800 pages. And so Memories, Dreams, Reflections is about 350 pages long. So obviously there was a lot of juicy material that was left out. And although we can make a hypothesis about what was being talked about, we don't necessarily know. And the PDF of the original protocols is available in German. I have a copy of it in PDF form. And so if you're interested in that, you can write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and I will make that available to you. But you'll need to be able to read German. And let me also mention, since we're at mentioning things right now, that if you are interested in being a part of our panel, I hope that you will register. And let's see, I have to find, there we are. Okay, so on the YouTube chat, I'm going to put the registration link so that you can register for notifications of all of our events. Now, holy smokes, I have a lot of people talking about things here. And so let me just look through what you've been saying. So the Big Cat says, this is refreshing. Just got done with a conversation on YouTube with someone arguing that Trump is the new Teddy Roosevelt and represents progressive values at home and internationally. Yeah, that's total BS. There's no comparison between Teddy Roosevelt and Donald Trump. And I actually am somewhat of an expert on this, since I wrote a paper when I was in college for an essay contest called the political responsibilities of educated young men. And I wrote it about Teddy Roosevelt because he was 35 when he became governor of New York. And he was about that age also, or a bit younger perhaps, when he charged up San Juan Hill as a U.S. Army officer. So,
well, and he was a bull. I mean,
right.
he had a bullet in his chest, and rather than canceling the speech, he gave a 90-minute speech. He'd just been shot, but he's like, there have been stronger things that have not taken a bull down, or however his quote was, but rather than not finishing complete sentences, this is a man who got shot and went to complete a speech, not just stutter through incomplete sentences. So I couldn't resonate more that they're not even polar. I wouldn't even put Trump.
They're
on
not even on the
spectrum.
same. They're not
No,
even.
He's
on
not.
The
He
same
can't
scale.
even fit the lower end of the spectrum with Teddy Roosevelt.
Right. Okay. So Art says,
if I have a button, that will be one of them. So
yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah. So good morning, Art. Fiona says, I see religion as how it is described in Damien and how it is described in a documentary. It was about the oldest temple ever found. Okay, Fiona, I don't actually remember precisely how it was described in Damien, but I can attest to the fact that Damien, which is by Hermann Hesse, and which also among the Jungian books was also one of the bases of earlier albums done by BTS. That is a wonderful book and highly recommendable book. And so I urge you all to read it, and also to get involved with the work that BTS, the Korean rock band or Korean K-pop band, is doing, because they are focusing on mental health, and it's something that's been desperately needed, especially by young people for decades now, and they're filling that hole. And one of the earlier albums, before the ones that specifically referred to Jung, there was Damien that they worked with. And of course, Hermann Hesse was a colleague and associate, also an analysand of Dr. Jung. So a lot of what comes through in Damien is things that Dr. Jung said. Andrew, what is the best way to get into the field of Jungian psychology with applied emphasis on PTSD and brain injuries as a whole? Well, I wouldn't say that I'm the expert on getting in, but I can tell you something about the process. In order to be a formal Jungian analyst, you need to first have at least a master's degree in either family therapy or social work, so a MSW degree, or MFT, I think it's called, Master of Family Therapy. So you need to have a master's degree, and you need to begin your actual practice of psychology or psychotherapy on a license basis at that point. And meanwhile, you need to be in contact with one of the Jung institutes in the world. There are quite a number of them. In the United States now, we have at least 4 that come to mind, or 5 now. There's one in New York City, which is the oldest, and there is the Mid-Atlantic Institute. And then there's also one in Houston, one in Chicago, and one in San Francisco. And I guess there's one in LA too. So there are quite a number of them. And in addition, there's Pacific Graduate Institute, which was founded by Dr. Aizenstat, whose essay I'm reading here. And that is a place to get a PhD in Jungian psychology or mythological studies, because those things, instead of being sort of out there idea now, people are starting to understand that mythology is really about us. And if we had the limited information that the ancient Greeks had at that time, we could easily have developed the Greek gods. And it's very easy to see that the Greek gods still live in us. If you read Jean Shinoda Boland's 2 books, one is called Gods in Every Man, and the other is Goddesses in Every Woman. If you read those 2 books, she describes 8 archetypes for each gender. It doesn't mean that you have to have a male archetype if you're a man, because some people don't. But it allows you to understand the way your psyche works and the way you want to live. And it was extremely helpful to me because, first of all, I learned that my main archetype is Hermes, and Hermes is Mercury, and Hermes is the messenger, and the messenger is the person who brings things from the unconscious to the conscious level. And so therefore my creating this YouTube channel and talking about these things is helping bring up in your minds the types of things that I think are important, but are in your psyche, not in the physical world. And so that's my really happy place, my go home place. But it doesn't mean that you will be Hermes. You might be something else. And my secondary archetype is Hephaestus, which is Vulcan. So Vulcan at the forge is hammering out things. He's making things. And of course, making this YouTube channel is a process of making things. And in my Myers-Briggs type, which is INTP, that is referred to as the architect. And Jordan is an architect here, a real architect, but I'm not that kind of an architect, although I was quite interested in it in my youth. But knowing these types that Jean Shinoda Boland speaks of can be very helpful to you in your life, and they've been very helpful to me for all of my life. So while Jordan further comments on this, I'm going to put the names of those 2 books on the YouTube
Excellent.
chat.
Just a simple thing too, to me, what's come to me with the black books is I find it's going to make the red book and Jungian's depth psychology more accessible. I jumped right into the red book, but that's how I roll. I mean, images being my first language, in a sense, my mother tongue. But if I step back from that, I would say it was put offish. It was inaccessible. It was, oh, well, I can't work that neat. I work messy. I don't just only put this perfect painting on every page. It's because it first came off as if it was, the first draft. Like he just did this. Whereas I look at the black books and you open the hood and see what's making it work. And then you realize that the red book was what he came to. It was his architectural building. I mean, it was what he put together from all of the, say, construction drawings and notes and schematics and thoughts and dead-end roads and wonderful forays for pearls into who knows where in the black books. So I think that when people see the process in the black books, they just literally I Ching open them up. I think it's going to create a more welcoming environment instead of an on high, well, I can't make a masterpiece, so I'll look away from the red book. And that just supports the silo, so to speak, in the professional Jungian crowd, rather than the black books, I think, kind of crack open the bottom and, all the grain starts to come out.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that David G., who's been one of our guests, is here also. Mario Gutierrez, who is from LA, is here. So, oh my God, it's early for you, Mario. It's before 6 a.m.
You need to be drawing spirals right now.
Yeah.
I loved your presentation.
Right. Yeah, that was a great presentation, Mario. And so, okay, going on now. So I've finished that section. I'm up to section 3, and this is where we get into the religious stuff. So this is some of the juicy stuff, I think. So this is part 3 of Stephen Eisenstat's essay entitled "The Quest for One's Own Red Book in the Digital Age." And I'm reading from Jung's Red Book from Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt. And I'm reading from volume 3 of this series. It's published by Chiron Publications, but you can get the book also on Amazon. I think one of our recent featured speakers, Steve Buser, who is the publisher of Chiron Publications, that's Chiron, Chiron, would appreciate it if you'd buy it directly from their website instead of Amazon, but that's just my guess. Okay, so part 3. And I'm on page 383 of this essay, Closing Reflections, Embarking Upon One's Own Red Book Journey. And he gives us a quote from Dr. Jung. And here's the quote: "The way is within us, but not in God's, nor in teachings, nor in laws. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life." Okay, now there's 20 years of work wrapped up in that quote for Dr. Jung, because he literally unpacked the Abrahamic religions in several books. The most important of these books is Answer to Job. So I would, if you are not familiar with Answer to Job, I urge you to read that. It will be mind-boggling. But
Skip, might you read that quote, the Jung quote, one more time?
Yes. All right, so here's the quote. "The way is within us, but not in God's, not in teachings, nor in laws. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life." And so the point is that people think of Dr. Jung as just another psychologist, but that's not true at all. And Dr. Jordan Peterson, who has become in the last few years quite famous for his book, 12 Rules for Life, is famous for name dropping Dr. Jung's name and referring to quotes that he got. So Dr. Jordan Peterson's experience with Jung is some basic things, and then he took the mean route, and so he made people like Dr. Paul Vanderklay, who is a Reformed pastor in Sacramento, California. And Paul got quite amazed by Dr. Jordan Peterson's 13 lectures that he gave in Toronto about 2.5, 3 years ago on Genesis. He did 13 lectures on the book of Genesis from a psychological perspective. And he was packing them in. He had rented an entire theater in downtown Toronto. He was filling the theater at $40 a pop, and people were coming to hear him speak. And so Paul, who is at least a strong acquaintance of mine, I can't yet say that we're friends. I hope that we are friends over time, but I don't know if Paul thinks I'm a gadfly at this point. but anyway, Paul was convinced that Jordan Peterson is a Jungian, and he and I did an interview together, which you can find on the homepage of this YouTube channel. My interview with Paul Vanderklay, and in that interview, when he was talking about, well, Jung or Peterson is a Jungian, and I said, no, he's not. He's not anything like a Jungian, and Paul said he's not, and the reason he was confused was because Peterson name drops a lot and talks about memes, short quotes from Jung. And Jung wrote 20 volumes of his collected works. So there are a lot of quotes. I have 2 whole books of collected quotes.
And he tends to hit the high notes or just skipping stones. He just doesn't drop in. He doesn't drop in. Right.
And so he's not a Jungian, and Dr. Peterson considers him himself the savior of the logos. So one of the other books that Dr. Jung wrote, called Ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self, but most of us refer to that as Ion, A-I-O-N. Dr. Peterson said in a lecture that's on YouTube that's the most dangerous book I ever read, or something to that effect. And
and he would, though, because it requires substance, depth, and taking the long road home of actually doing the work rather than name dropping or just quoting.
Right. And people that are into the logos think that you have to have structure, and so you have to memorize the Bible and what have you, but that's not true at all. And that's how things have been done for thousands of years. But in the process of that, we've lost the taste of life. And so what we need to understand is that we need logos, okay? Everything that you have in your room that is not a human being or a potted plant was put there by logos. If I have this book or the books that are behind me, and all of those things, and my water glass and the computer that I'm talking to you through, all those things were created by logos, 100%. And an architect like Jordan clearly knows that you have to design a building in a certain way, and it has to meet all the required stresses and so on. And that's all logos, and men love logos because that's if they can understand something and how to build something that gives meaning to their lives, that's important. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you look around your room and you see all these wonderful things in your room that you've purchased, every one of them you purchase for a purpose. And they're nice tools to live your life around, but none of them, not a single one, is alive. The only thing that's alive is you, and you live your life in the eros. And so that's what was missed by Christianity and the development of civilization. And so the result is, well, I can actually show you the result, because, and most of you have probably seen this picture that I took in my community recently, a couple of years back now. But this boat is a 64-foot motor yacht, and it's parked at the dock there. But its name is the point, and the point is never enough. And so I owned a boat at one time too, and I bought an expensive boat that I had to buy with a partner. And when we took it out into the Chesapeake Bay and started to hit the waves, the first thing we said to one another is, "We need a bigger boat." and so the point is that you can get on this materialistic treadmill and think that you're going to finally get there. If I have a 64-foot motor yacht, God, that'd be great, and I'm going to work my ass off so that I'll have that motor yacht. The problem is that when you get to have a 64-foot motor yacht, you say, we need a bigger boat, because until you have something like a destroyer in the Chesapeake Bay, you're still going to get bounced around by the waves. That's the reality. And so it's never enough. Materialism is never enough, and it never satisfies you. And one more thing is that motor yacht is dead. It's sitting there. There's not a human being on it. There's no life in it. And so in terms of life, it's much ado about nothing. And it only has meaning for human life when the owner comes out, gets on it, cranks it up, and goes out in the bay. Then it's useful as a tool for life. And that's eros, that's not logos. Sitting there at the dock, it's logos, I agree. But Dr. Peterson has missed the point. We live our lives in the eros. And so I want to just I'll read the first two paragraphs of the red book. Just
before
my point. Go ahead, George.
And yeah, before you do, actually, it may substantiate your point as well. To contribute from me as an architect to you, Skip Conover, as an architect, I can use the term very generally, and at the same time, psycho-spiritual architect. I mean, I'll take that one on myself too. But I find that we're all the architect of our lives, and there's a place where the playing field levels, and that is the blank white page, or the blank yellow piece of tracing paper. And the first thing I do as an architect is I decide the structural system. You don't just start putting things together. And Jordan Peterson has basically a house of quote cards. And that comes down so quickly, as we saw, from internal problems. And this here, I'd just like to say with this, you're an architect. I mean, you put things together and you start from scratch and you use all the things your whole life up to that point.
That's Jacob's ladder. I agree with that, but
yeah,
I'm getting a little bit of argumentation. Maybe I don't know if it's argumentation, but Arian Ossie says, "Logos is the language of truth. Christ, the way, the life in us through the Holy Spirit." Well, okay, that's all well and good, and it is, the logos is how we build up civilization, as Jordan was just pointing out. We all build civilization by building structures through words or images in our psyches that help us live. But even in Christianity, I just want to point out, because it's been missed by theologians and it's a big issue. And the reason I say that is, I just give you an example. Bishop Barron, who's a famous YouTube personality, is the chairman of a committee of Catholic bishops whose job it is to bring people back into the church. And the results of their work, that committee's work, is they're losing 6 Catholics for every one they bring in. Okay, and he stated that in a conversation with Jordan Peterson one day, and it's on YouTube. You can look it up. And so he says, okay, my committee of bishops who are in charge of marketing for the Catholic Church, we're losing 6 Catholics for every one we bring in. Well, I'm a retired business executive, or semi-retired business executive, and I said, man, if you were my sales manager, I'd fire you on the spot and find somebody else. And then he sort of passively says, well, maybe we can teach the catechism better. Well, no, that's not the answer. The answer is right here. It's in the Bible. It's in John. Okay, so now here's what he relies on. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All right, so now that's what it says in John 1:1. Okay, and so the Christian church has hung its hat on that verse, or those 2 verses, for 2,000 years. The Word is God. Okay, but they didn't bother to read down to verse 4 and 5, okay, of chapter 1, John 1:4 and 5. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And so the point is, even in the Bible, the operative idea is life. It's not structure, okay? Structure is a way that we can build up civilization. It's a way we can educate people, but it is not life. Life is us. And so we need to understand that it's been in the Bible since the beginning, and all they had to do was read 3 verses down and they would have gotten that, but they didn't get it. And
Skip, if I may, an old adage, in complete support of that, is the old adage of art and heart drive culture. Technology merely supports it, like a toothpick tool after dinner. And it feels to me like technology is the new tool after dinner. It's just a support. But it is not that which drives culture, but the structure has it's very, in a sense, architecturally, I don't know if you're familiar with post-Baroque, which is Chirigaresque, where all the vines and flowers and acanthus leaves, they've overgrown and stoned the structure. It's so overly ornate. And I feel like the technology has, in a sense, like a Borg, it's overly grown that logos.
Right, and they had exactly the same problem at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, when they put the Bible together. The Bible that we now use was adopted in 325 AD. That's 325 years after the life of Christ. So just imagine, what do you remember from 325 years ago? Think back and try to figure out what was happening 325 years ago. What do you know about it? But here are these guys who met in Nicaea, Turkey, and they adopted the Bible. And so here's what the Bible says, John 1:11. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. So, in other words, even people in that time, in Jesus's time, didn't get this point. And so here's the point I want to make to you, and why Jordan Peterson is not a Jungian, because he considers himself the savior of the Logos. And so you can therefore consider me and Dr. Jung the saviors of the Eros. So here's what Dr. Jung says in the very first 2 paragraphs of the Red Book. If I speak in the spirit of this time, I must say, no one and nothing can justify what I must proclaim to you. Justification is superfluous to me, since I have no choice, but I must. I have learned that in addition to the spirit of this time, there is still another spirit at work, namely that which rules the depths of everything contemporary. The spirit of this time would like to hear of use and value. I also thought this way, and my humanity still thinks this way. But that other spirit forces me nevertheless to speak beyond justification, use, and meaning. Filled with human pride and blinded by the presumptuous spirit of the times, I long sought to hold that other spirit away from me. But I did not consider that the spirit of the depths from time immemorial and for all the future possesses a greater power than the spirit of this time, who changes with the generations. The spirit of the depths has subjected all pride and arrogance to the power of judgment. He took away my belief in science. He robbed me of the joy of explaining and ordering things. And he let devotion to the ideals of this time die out in me. He forced me down to the last and simplest things. The spirit of the depths took my understanding and all my knowledge and placed them at the service of the inexplicable and the paradoxical. He robbed me of speech and writing for everything that was not in his service, namely the melting together of sense and nonsense, which produces the supreme meaning. Okay, and then he has a passage here called the supreme meaning. I call it the supreme meaning, so I can read that too. But in those 2 paragraphs that I just read, you understand why Jordan Peterson is not a Jungian, not at all. Okay, or I haven't seen his new book, which I don't think is published yet. So I'll be interested to see, because I have been calling him on these things before he became
Was it C.S. Lewis who said going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than standing in your garage makes you a car?
That's right. Okay, let me, since I'm on a roll with the Red Book.
I mean, so he doesn't become a Jungian just by quoting Jung.
Precisely. And Paul has had a hard time, Paul Vanderklay, who I've been interacting with on his website for a couple of years in a collegial kind of way. I hope he regards it as collegial and not intended as being a gadfly, which I don't consider myself. But Paul's still having difficulty wrapping his mind around it, because he thinks, well, geez, what could be wrong with what Jordan Peterson is doing? Well, there's nothing wrong with what he's doing, and I agree with what he's doing 99.5%. But we have to understand the context and what it is he is in fact doing, which is helping people to understand the Bible in a psychological way. But, at least up until the moment that he started to have his breakdown, he couldn't say that he believes in God. And there's a qualitative difference, because Dr. Jung said, and you can find it on this YouTube channel, I have no need to believe, I know. And when I heard him say that the first time, I said, oh, I know too. So what is it I know? And I had to spend 10 years working out what I knew. But now I do know. And the fact is that there is God. He's not Geppetto pulling your strings, though. And so, all of the major religions have to be updated for modern categories of understanding. That's very simple. And Dr. Edward Edinger said that precisely 25 years ago, and people haven't grokked it yet, but that's what needs to happen. Okay, so let me read the supreme meaning. It's half a page of the red book. It's after the first two paragraphs of the red book, so it's right at the beginning in the first two pages. And I'm reading from the reader's edition, which doesn't have any of the pictures in it. So you can get it for about $25 as opposed to the folio edition, which does have the pictures and which costs a lot on Amazon. But here it is. But the supreme meaning is the path, the way, and the bridge to what is to come. That is the God yet to come. It is not the coming God himself, but his image, which appears in the supreme meaning. God is an image, and those who worship him must worship him in the image of the supreme meaning. The supreme meaning is not a meaning and not an absurdity. It is image and force at once, magnificence and force together. The supreme meaning is the beginning and the end. It is the bridge of going across and fulfillment. The other gods died out of their temporality, yet the supreme meaning never dies. It turns into meaning and then into absurdity. And out of the fire and blood of their collision, the supreme meaning rises up, rejuvenated anew. The image of God has a shadow. The supreme meaning is real and casts a shadow. For what can be actual and corporeal and have no shadow? The shadow is nonsense. It lacks force and has no continued existence through itself. But nonsense is the inseparable and undying brother of the supreme meaning. Like plants, so men also grow, some in the light, others in the shadows. There are many who need the shadows and not the light. The image of God throws a shadow that is just as great as itself. The supreme meaning is great and small. It is as wide as the space of the starry heaven and as narrow as the cell of the living body. So that's it. And I guess the point of that is that the supreme meaning is life itself, and it resides in all life. And, it's all well and good for the church to have created civilization by intermediating between the people and God. But the reality is you never needed the church. And in a sense, the church has a shadow, as we know from the scandals of the Catholic Church in the last 30 years. But also, if you just look at St. Peter's, that's raw power brought the money necessary to create that. That was created on the backs of human beings and on the backs of human life. And so, it is quite impressive, but it's still a thing. It's dead until a priest or the Pope puts life into it. And so when the Pope puts life into it, as Pope Francis has done, then it has meaning and then it's useful. But if it's used to murder people, then it's just power and power politics. The reason we're having this conversation right now, or such as it is, this soliloquy right now, is that my ancestors were Dutchmen. They were Dutch farmers, and they were being subjected to the 80 Years' War. And so this was human beings in Western Europe who couldn't allow their fellow Europeans to believe in God in a different way. And so every summer for 80 years, the Catholic Spanish, came up to Holland to beat the Dutch back into the Catholic Church. And there was warfare through the summer, and then every fall after the harvest, the Dutch would flood their country and the Spanish would go home to sunny Spain for the winter. And, men often are dunderheads. And so it took 80 years to beat through their heads that they didn't have to do that. They were all Christians. And the only reason they had to do that was the church wanted the revenue from the Dutch. And that there wasn't anything religious about that. And so in the midst of that, in 1625, my first American ancestor came to New Amsterdam with his wife and 3 sons, and they were 5 of the first 150 European settlers of Manhattan Island. They were literally among the ones that bought Manhattan for $24. and I'm the 13th generation of first sons from that man. I don't claim that that's any great thing, because if you do the permutation back through parentage, he constitutes 1/81/20th of my, so 8,120 ancestors in that generation, and so he's one of those. But many of my ancestors in succeeding generations were also of Dutch origin, and they were in the New World for 150 years before the American Revolution as Dutchmen. And so if I go to Amsterdam, I see my cousins everywhere I look. Dutch people look like my cousins. And so there's no doubt in my mind. But anyway, that's a digression. But here...
Well, if I may, really quickly, to frame the church in a Jungian manner, we are all each our own vessel. And then the church is the community vessel of the suburban or the urban vessel. And then it matters what not is poured so much into it, but what is spilled from it. And that's where we get into beauty or into trouble.
So where we get into trouble is when we start to use guns to convince others to believe in our way, which, Dr. Jung said it very clearly in his lifetime in the 10th volume of the Collected Works, where he said all the major religions are psychotherapeutic systems, and in grand, mighty images, they express the psychological development of man. And so basically, it was the priest or the pastor or the rabbi or the guru or the mullah who conveyed, who served as the psychotherapist of the community, going back at least to the point of Abraham we can point to. And we know his story, and probably long before that. And so these were people who were helping their fellow men work through the troubles that come up in a human life. And, you know, probably they weren't much different from us, except they didn't have the information we have, and they didn't have the tools that we have. But now we have this chaos, that my little red ball here, we have chaos because the average man of the 16th century only had as much information in a lifetime as we get in the Sunday New York Times, one edition. That's how much information those people had only 400 years ago. It's not long. And so the point is that now we have all the information in the world at our fingertips. And how do we sort that out? Well, that's one of the things that I've been doing on this YouTube channel for the last 4.5 years. And it's one thing that Jordan and I are doing on Monday nights, talking about the Tarot, because the Tarot is also a psychotherapeutic system that is unchanged in 600 years. So it too is a psychotherapeutic system, and we're explaining that on Monday nights. But moving on now. Let's see. Okay, so there are a lot of comments here on the YouTube chat, most of which I agree with, but I can't address them all. So I'm going to go on with Dr. Eisenstat's essay, which I don't know if I will get to the end of it here, because the next page has a humdinger. So I think I'll hope to get through one more page. And so here's what he says. So he's given this Jung quote, which I've been extemporaneously speaking on for the last 45 minutes. And I'll read it once again. Okay. The way is within us, but not in God's, not in teachings, not in laws, nor in laws. Within us is the way, the truth, and the life. In what ways can Jung's excursions into the spirit of the depths, as narrated, as named in the Red Book, be applied to today's increasingly technological world? How are the symbols and mythical figures that emerge from his underworld excursions germane to our modern high-speed, outward-facing cyber reality? What would today's Red Book look like? How would it evolve? How could the unfathomable depths of the imagination in the Red Book come to life in a Silicon Valley-centered universe? I believe that if Jung, at least the Jung who lives in my imagination, had a wish, it would be that each of us would create our own Red Book, that we would receive inspiration and guidance from Jung's expeditions into the spirit of the depths, and then take the deep dive ourselves, writing, drawing, and describing the images, figures, symbols, landscapes, and events that emerge from the opus of our own encounters with the psyche as they orchestrate our underworld explorations. All too often, we reduce the wondrous to causal explanations, and the magic disappears and goes underground. Perhaps better to read and experience Jung's Red Book as a dream rather than a textbook. In his journal, Jung lets the images take the lead. He meets them in their world and allows them to display themselves and tell their stories. Images first, explanations second. The ancients devised magic to compel fate. They needed it to determine outer fate. We need it to determine inner fate and to find the way that we are unable to conceive. Okay, so the point is that if you have religious experiences, and I have them daily, there's no question in your mind about the existence of God. And so it's not a question of believing in God. Belief, it means that somebody else has convinced you of their way. But it doesn't mean that you yourself are really convinced. You have to know God in order to appreciate what it's all about. And men have been pointing to God for thousands of years, and they've created a sort of general impression of what that is, but they've also engendered magical thinking. So they make us think, for example, that if we pray, we can fix somebody on the other side of the continent or something like that. Well, grandma is sick, I'll pray for her. Well, probably that's going to have a very limited effect on your grandma, but what you can do, because prayer isn't about talking to somebody up there. Prayer is about talking to somebody in here. And it's a petition to your unconscious to help you do the right thing in the circumstance. Grandma may live or die. And the God within you, we are all part of the consciousness of God, and the God within you is going to help you do the right thing to appreciate the situation. And it is that God that is going to help you. I mean, it's, my standard statement at this point is, if you see the football player running across the goal line and he points up, and to thank God, he's pointing in the wrong direction. He needs to point here to his heart, because if he had been petitioning God to help him be a great football player, that God would have gotten him into the gym and would have caused him to run miles and miles and do sprints and do scrimmages and all kinds of things for years and years before he could make that touchdown. But that all came from within him. It wasn't somebody pulling his strings. And so in my case, when I was in high school, I used to say a little prayer as I was walking to my school bus, which was, Almighty Heavenly Father, please give me the strength to do my best in this test today. And at that time, when I was 15 or 16 years old, I thought I was praying to that God. But what I was doing was petitioning the God within me to do my best, and which, I did okay. I have 10 years of higher education, so I managed to get through. So, but, it's time to turn it around and to recognize that what you're doing is you're petitioning your unconscious to do the right thing in a circumstance. So, you may not, okay, you hear about some sort of casual acquaintance that is in an auto accident, and they're in ICU, And if you say, I'm going to pray for you, it really doesn't mean that the Geppetto God is going to swoop in and save that person because you said that prayer. But it does mean that you are now cognizant that that sort of thing that can happen. For example, a few days ago, I heard of a friend who was got out of quarantine and was hit by a drunk driver and is in ICU now. And that person happens to be on the other side of the country from me. And so the Geppetto God isn't going to do anything for that person. That person will be saved if he and the people that are saving his life have what it takes, the right stuff to save his life. But what it does do is it causes me to reflect on the circumstances of what happened to that young man. And as a result of that fact, I might be able to persuade my grandsons, for example, not to drunk drive, or not drive under the influence. And so in terms of a direct help to the young man on the other side of the country, probably not. But in terms of advancement for our society and to make our society better, it certainly reminds me, and it petitions my psyche to remember how painful this is and to try to change mankind in such a way that it won't happen to others. I've had a lot of experiences with auto accidents one way or another over my lifetime. When I was 18, a young man was killed in the car I was riding in. Fortunately, I was a passenger in that case in the back seat, and he was 2 seats to my right. But he was killed, and the man next to me had his collarbone broken in 2 places, his pelvis broken in 2 places, and ended up missing a year of college because of it. And I walked away from it as if something was protecting me. Now, I don't know what the circumstance was that made me walk away from the accident and those 2 men, one die and one be in the hospital for weeks. But I know, because I'm telling you this, that the young man who was killed, his spirit still lives in me. And because I've told you this story, his spirit now lives in you. And, maybe that will help you at some point in your life. That's the point. Now let's see what folks are saying on YouTube.
And Skip, you make a good point with the Geppetto version of God this way, where it dispenses with God as the adult version of the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, and it turns it into the I don't believe in God, astrology, tarot, any more than I believe in my range or my fridge, but every day in a deep knowing, I use it to nourish me.
Okay, now Arian Ossie asks a question which is going to be controversial, but I'm going to respond to it because I think it's important. He says, doesn't lust and the sin of lust take your life energy like ejaculating and coveting? Well, I think that you can cut the grass, but you can't stop it from growing. And that, in order to be a healthy human man, ejaculation is part of your life, and from the time of puberty on. And so, however that happens, it seems to me that it needs to happen. My father was very hung up on this issue, and he once told me that he hadn't ejaculated since he was 67, and when he was 72, he had prostate cancer, and so I don't consider that a sin. I consider that a part of the way we are as human beings. And what is sinful is not addressing the consequences of what you're doing. So if you're servicing your physical needs causes someone else to have a horrible life, what they call a ruined life, then that is a sin. That, that's shameful. And we obviously, this is still a huge problem, and it's still a huge issue in our politics, because we have all this coming and going about abortion, even in this year's election. And so what I would say, and I was conflicted about it. I have to tell you that I was conflicted about it when I started to live with my wife, which was 35 years ago. And I knew that she was quite an activist in favor of abortion. And so I asked her, how do I think about this? And, her point was that, these decisions are difficult ones, and they should be the decision of the individual. So namely the decision of the person that is involved, namely the woman, and not the decision of government. And so in my case, I'm personally against abortion. I've always hoped that none of my daughters would have an abortion, and none of them ever did. And I don't favor that solution. However, I believe that women should have the right to make their own decision, because when a woman becomes pregnant, that's going to affect her life for at least 20 or 25 years. And if she has a child, and if it's a child of a rapist or someone, if it's a child of someone she doesn't want to have a child with, that needs to be her decision. And it shouldn't be just because she made a mistake that she should end up having her life turned on its head while the man can go off into the sunset. I mean, that is a sin. And, the hypocrisy of the pro-life movement is just phenomenal, because they don't want people to have abortions, but then when young women who don't have financing have their babies, then they won't support those babies. And so that's not pro-life. That's just we want to have these babies as a slave class that we can use as slaves. And we have modern slavery. It's in the form of long-term jail sentences for young men.
Yeah, pro-life in that sense becomes pro-poverty.
Yeah,
and in no uncertain terms. And I'd like to quickly peel apart Could you read the question again? Because it's an important one.
Not sure I can find it. Just a minute. Doesn't lust and the sin of lust take your life energy, like ejaculating and coveting?
So lust is presented as a concept, and then the sin of lust, I understand that he's trying to, or he's insinuating that lust is a sin, but lust is a quality, and then a sin of lust would be an opposing quality to lust. Ejaculation is natural. If you plug a system, it will explode. Fortunately, the human body will reabsorb sperm, but other systems, if you close, you will explode, or it will go to prostate cancer. The blockage will cause a backup, just like a drain. It's clogged, it's dirty, it's messy. But then switch to, if you say that ejaculation should have negative connotations, you are trying to impose a law on someone's body. And from my tort law knowledge, there are 0 laws on the books governing men's bodies. And I also think that's the same number that should be on the books that govern women's bodies. In no uncertain terms, 0 should equal 0, and that's how many laws should govern bodies. As you mentioned, Skip, for it or against it, it's not your choice. It's their choice. If they are going to basically have their life derailed and knocked off course, life in general, even successful life, can be knocked off course in the blink of an eye. And without someone else's influence undermining everything you are striving to thrive with, that just doesn't sit in my book. So I kind of feel that the question is important, and that it expresses a belief, but then that's someone else, I feel, trying to impose a law on your life, and you are the only judge of your nature.
Yeah. Well, I think that, abortion too has its consequences. I happen to know one woman who's had 3, and then she never had children. I don't know the total story about that, but she did make the decision to have the abortions 3 times. I think maybe her father had a role in that, but the result of it was that she couldn't have children. And obviously having children for both men and women is an important part of the human experience. And so it's, abortion is tragic, and it also can be a bad part of life. But I think the people that are actually involved in these decisions should be making them, and I shouldn't be making them for them. That's my opinion. And I don't think a Bible thumping pastor should be making their decision for them either.
I couldn't agree more. And I think in a bigger picture, even in regards to this show and what we're trying to do, or this session, or this experience, whatever word we use to describe it, this enactment that we are doing. Questions like that in this forum, I thoroughly appreciate people say that question in other forums could have been so divisive and just caused explosive, volatile. That's not what's going to happen here. To me, that brought a very pure statement from another place, dogma or not, it doesn't matter. That is that person's perspective. And I'm sorry, I'm forgetting their name. I don't mean to demean them.
We're not going to repeat their name.
It doesn't matter. So, I mean, I think that I'm appreciative that was brought in, because it's an important, not opposing view. It's simply another part of the community that we can all come together as to how we are running this thing called life.
Right. Well, just in terms of my reaction to it, I'm descended from a long line of hard-headed Dutchmen. Okay. And those hard-headed Dutchmen were being forced to come back into the Catholic Church by the 80 Years' War. It was ultimately ended by the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. But my hard-headed Dutchman ancestors stuck around for 57 years of the 80 Years' War. And then they said, this is not for me. I'm going to get out. I just want to live. And so they got on a very leaky boat in 1625 and sailed to a place where there were only 145 other Europeans at the time and built a country. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so, I come from a whole ethos of people that were put down or tried to be put down by religious warfare in Western Europe. And, I don't agree with it. And, there probably half the American population is descended from people who left Europe because of religious wars. And, maybe 95% of Americans are descended from such people because we have so many different lines in our biology. As I said, that original ancestor who's 20 or 13 generations back, he only represents 1/81/20th of my DNA, but there are a lot of other hard-headed Dutchmen in there too. Right. And
well, it's the hardship too. My last name Hoggard is Hoggard. People who guard hogs weren't very good at spelling, so they lost the U first. But originally it was Swannard, which is swine herd. And when we did the research for my family, and my dad and stepmother went to visit our familial lands in Norway, they came to find that the way that our family eliminated themselves from the conflict was they worked land that would kill you and no one wanted. It was 35-degree angle, grassy hillside with a 600-foot drop off, but 250 feet long and maybe a mile wide and a mile long. They had to tie off the cows, the goats, to trees when they grazed so they wouldn't slide off the mountain. They had to tie off the kids to the trees when they were playing so they wouldn't fall over the bluff. But in that sense, they were insulated, but they drove themselves into hardship. And so there was no fear of that doing the work or enacting life. And so they left too, though, because at a certain point, that was their war and enough. So,
well, and let me point out, in terms of living with other human beings, that ancestor is credited with being involved in the founding of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Albany, and Rensselaer in New York State in his lifetime. And in a time when the average life expectancy was 40, he lived to be 83. And when he first went to live in Rensselaer, which is across the river from Albany, he lived in a community of 12 Europeans, 12. And obviously the entire Iroquois nation lived around him. And yet he found a way to be able to live for probably 25 or 30 years of his life in that area. And his progeny lived there for, they must have lived there for about 180 years. They finally, some of them still live there, I suppose, but then the men in 1810 got involved in building what's called the Cherry Valley Turnpike, which is US 20 through central New York, east to west. Um, and so in 1810, they literally made the cuts in the mountains that allowed that road to be built. And that was 210 years ago. And so obviously we spread to the winds. And, it's just like the Dalai Lama says that maybe the best thing to happen for Tibetan Buddhism was that he was forced out of Tibet, because it forced Tibetan Buddhist monks to go around the world and start talking about Tibetan Buddhism, which hadn't been done before.
You got dandelioned.
Yeah, and so, and that's what most of the people that live in North and South America are descended from, is from people who were, for one reason or another, forced to leave their original homes. And, because nobody leaves their home voluntarily. They leave because they're forced to by climate and conditions, or by other human beings. And so all of us that live in the Americas, including the Native Americans, were descended from people like that, because even the Native Americans came here, not more than 35,000 years ago, and some say 13,000 years ago. And so they came first, and they came for the same reasons, but all of us came for those same reasons in the human species. So
The Dalai Lama's religion is kindness. And from a Jungian standpoint, it is kind to come to know yourself. It may be difficult and maybe hardship, but there's a certain kindness religion of knowing yourself that I think is promoted there as well, because he certainly does. And sense of humor wise, that man is alive.
Yeah, he's cool.
Yeah, he's if you've seen him trick his interviewers, I mean, they'll not know what, and he's serious. It's a heart attack. I mean, but so but his religion is kindness, and I think that we can enact that, being kind to ourselves as we get to know ourselves.
Yeah. There was a stage show that was around when I was in high school called Lost Horizon. It's probably way older than that. It probably was 30 or 40 years old when I saw it in my high school. But it's about Westerners going to Tibet before the Dalai Lama left Tibet, and the name of the show is quite interesting, Lost Horizon, because what's happened to us now, and that's what my metaphor of the red ball is about, is we've lost our horizon. We don't have a clear idea of who we are or where we're going. But one thing that I do believe that Edward Edinger said is, we're all going to become one thing ultimately, or we're going to destroy ourselves. One of the two. It's not. There's no middle way there. And I'm not saying when that will happen, but we're either going to learn to live with one another, as my ancestors did in Rensselaer, New York, or we're not going to be able to survive at all as a species, and that applies to everybody. And so,
and what was it Mephisto said in answer to Job, trying to convince anything worth creation is worth liquidation, and that was trying to misuse, the value.
Right. Okay, so my voice is now officially given out, and I hope that everyone has found this useful. Manuela says abortion is tragedy 100%, and I agree that it's tragedy 100%. I don't believe it's the responsibility of women to deal with that on their own. I think that men who have a bit of maturity need to understand that they have a responsibility too. And it's not a question of sin. I mean, that idea was developed in the magical thinking of the Christian church, but we need to just teach our sons properly about living and their responsibility to their fellow human beings. And that's just a matter of education, or not just, that's a matter of properly educating our children. And that's one of the reasons that I've been doing this YouTube channel and also my website, Archetype in Action, for the last decade, is that we have to teach one another better how to live with one another. And that's why I'm so impressed with BTS, because, you know, even though they're young Korean men who don't speak English, they're causing people around the world to start to reflect and to study Dr. Jung and to reflect themselves, to understand themselves and how their actual physical being works. And that's what we're about here. So Curtis says we have to, quote unquote, destroy lower selves to become one thing. Well, I think we need to amend our language, okay? Because yes, in a sense, that's true in the belligerent language that we currently use, but I think that Dr. Jung's language is better, which is transform. We have to transform ourselves. And that's what individuation is about. And if I get out of the way here, no books on transformation. That's what the black books are. And so this is about transformation. We're all born with the same instincts, and we need to bend those instincts to our needs as a species. And that is better done by education. In part, we're doing that education via movies and television shows and conversations like this. But we all have to be committed to better education of young human beings, because, you know, all of us, when we're born, are wild animals. We don't know anything. I mean, we have our basic physical integrity, but we don't know anything about civilization or about how to even get ourselves fed until we learn from our parents how to speak to them. And so we are in a constant process of education. And, you know, this is, you know, one of the issues that has come up in the women's movement, which was, you know, recently there have been 60, 70-year-old women out in demonstrations with big signs saying, I thought we already did this 50 years ago. And the point is, it's never done. Okay, there's no done, because we're, you know, the world produces, I don't know, tens of thousands of, hundreds of thousands of new children every day. Okay, those are all wild animals that are born every day. And those wild animals have to be bent to the uses of what they need to be in order to survive in our society as it is today. And yes, of course, we lived in a different way in earlier days. I mean, in the time of my first American ancestors, they lived by hunting and fishing and trading pelts and that sort of thing. But we don't have to do that now, because we can go to the grocery store and we can expect people at meat packing plants to provide which are slaughterhouses. It's just a nice way of saying slaughterhouse, right? So we can rely on people who work in slaughterhouses to make it so we don't physically have to go out and shoot and field dress our own deer anymore. We can expect to get most of our food at the grocery store. But so life has changed, but it's still pretty brutal. I mean, if you look at any other species outside the human species, it's dog eat dog outside my window. It's wild kingdom, and we have many deer in my neighborhood, and many foxes, and we have birds of prey around, osprey and eagles, and one time I found a snake that had gotten caught on a piece of sticky paper. It was sticky paper that you use to catch insects, catch and kill ants or something like that. And somehow a snake had gotten onto this sticky paper, and it had died. And so my neighbor had just thrown this out into basically next to the street. And so I came upon it, and I said, gee, I better clean that up. And so I went to get some materials to get this snake off the sticky paper and throw the sticky paper away. And so I just went back in my house, but within in the 2 minutes that I was gone, some bird had come down and grabbed that snake. One time we had a tidal pond outside of my house that occasionally would open to the Severn River, which is an estuary of the Chesapeake Bay. And so this tidal pond would be open sometimes and closed sometimes. And so one time when it was closed, and it had a lot of fish in it because they liked the warm water in there, but it was also like shooting ducks in a pond for the osprey, because the osprey could not only see the fish, the pond was only maybe 3 feet deep. And so the osprey could see the fish, and when they got big enough, that was easy for him to pick them out of the pond. But on one occasion, the golf course that was above my house, not near my house, but higher in level, put fertilizer down, and the fertilizer came down into our pond at a time that it was closed, and they killed about 3,000 fish. And so I was furious because the whole coast next to my house was littered with these pretty big rockfish. Rockfish can get up to 40, 50 pounds sometimes. So they're very big. And they were 3 feet deep all the way around this pond, which I guess is a 5 or 6 acre tidal pond. And so I was furious, and I called the animal control and said, you have to get this golf course to come and truck these carcasses away. This is going to stink the place up. I thought all these carcasses were going to be there outside my home and stink the place up. But he says, oh no, nature will take care of that. And sure enough, in about a week, everything was gone. There was not a single fish carcass on the shore. All the creatures, all the wild creatures that lived there had taken it. And that's how they have to live. They don't have grocery stores. And the osprey and the eagles, I call them air wars Annapolis, because they have constant wars outside my house. And So we're pretty lucky as a species the way we live, and we do represent the consciousness of God. Um, and and so understanding that, we have to clean ourselves up and enter this new stage of consciousness where we recognize that it is about us and that we are the consciousness of God. And if you want God to work in a certain way, then you need to enact that way and to recognize that way. And it isn't to say that any religious approach is wrong, because all of them work for the purpose of mental health over thousands of years. And so they all have their, they all have their features, but we have to be able to distinguish between what is a way that helps us deal with our lives as human beings and what is in the service of power. And when people are trying to jam something down your throat because of their religion, I would be obviously against that immediately, regardless of what it is. And that's the point with Dr. Jung. And so circling back now to Jordan Peterson on Ion, the second book in this group of 4 that Dr. Jung wrote at the end of his life, Jordan Peterson thought it was the most dangerous book he'd ever read, or the scariest book he had ever read. And the reason is because Dr. Jung was recognizing the fact that the magical thinking isn't cutting it anymore. That's clear from the 20th century, when we killed 280 million people by this materialistic attitude that we have. And of course, Donald Trump is the poster boy for materialism, because he's gotten everything that anybody could possibly get. He's gotten 3 trophy wives. He's gotten his own airplane, multiple buildings with his name on them, presidency of the United States, his own airplane when we're not providing it for him. Whatever he has wanted in his lifetime, he's gotten in the physical world. But as the Tarot teaches us, that's only 1/4, or actually 1/5 of the world. And so all you have to do is look at Donald Trump and see, is he a happy man? He's gotten all those things, and yet, is he living a happy life? Is he living a satisfied life? Does he have meaning in his life? And I would argue that it's plain as the nose on your face that he's not. And so if you want to learn how to live your life, don't learn from Donald Trump. I mean, it's nice to have a physically comfortable life where you can support yourself and all that stuff and not go hungry. Obviously, we have certain levels of needs, all of us as a species. But that doesn't mean we should grab at the cost of everyone else, because everybody else has those needs too. And in the end, obviously, it doesn't make you happy. And so you need to find out what are the other things that can make you happy so that you can have a balanced life. This is individuation, so that you can become the king in all 5 suits of the Tarot. If you can do that, then you're individuated. Then you know what you're talking about in terms of what is the best way to live a human life. And that's what we're about here. We're trying to teach one another how and I, as I say, one another, because I'm not the end all be all of thinking about these things, and certainly Dr. Jung and others have been thinking about it for thousands of years. But this is my homily, so I get to.
Well, I think your pond story is actually a great teaching to speak to the question about should we destroy those contents inside, and that no, we should, like the foxes and the ospreys and the eagles and the critters and the creatures, we should eat them. We should consume them and meet them and digest and nourish with them so that they are integrated to not recycle. That is us nourishing by our own nature. Mm-hmm. Maybe especially the ones that are terrifying, because maybe they need the help the most, because maybe they've been stuck there the longest. I love the pond where nature takes its way. You have all these fish, and then a week later they're gone. So all those contents, a week later, they're gone, and they'll come back. Don't wait; there'll be more.
Right. So Arian says that he had this. He said the same thing about ion. I think he means the same as what Dr. Peterson said, and that's a natural reaction. I mean, the first time I read it and I got to chapter 5, the title of chapter 5 is Jesus Christ as a Symbol of the Self. And I read that and I said, are you talking about the Son of God as a symbol? Is that what you mean? I mean, I'm having this conversation with Dr. Jung, and I couldn't get my mind around that, because I had been so programmed by Christian education all of my life that I couldn't cope with what Dr. Jung was saying. I couldn't. It just didn't compute. And it took me 10 years of study and reading, and also experiencing personal experiences to get my mind around it. So it's not easy. These things are not easy. And, that's why I'm doing this YouTube channel, is to make it easier for people, to make it more approachable, so that they can understand the things that they need to understand to live a life. And that's exactly what we're doing on Monday nights, talking about the Tarot as a roadmap for life. Jordan is a key part of our group that's doing that. And, we have to understand, how can we step back from this red ball of chaos and understand where we are in our lives. And that's what the Tarot is doing now and has done for the last 600 years. But, very few people have understood it. A lot of people do, but I would say the percentage of the population that understands that the Tarot can be a roadmap for their life is probably less than 5%. I don't know. Do you have a number for that, Jordan?
I don't, because there's, as we found in between 2007 and 2010, there were 5-digit numbers, 6-digit numbers of people in the Tarot closet. And executives, people did not want people to know they did Tarot, but they utilized it as a wise counsel, a self-reflection device that they found much more helpful than throwing darts at a wall for the market, where then they had to feel into, what's it feel like? And
right.
so
anyway,
numbers are large. I don't know
right.
the percentage though.
Yeah. So I know Bill Gates does it, because somebody brought that to my attention the other day. But we're not doing Tarot here today.
No. Bill Gates, though, I love the quote he uses for natural nature of getting something done. He says, take your most complex problem, assemble a team of your laziest people, because they'll get it done faster so they can get back to doing nothing, and it will certainly be a simple solution.
Okay, so on the YouTube chat, I've put the link to
Cool.
the MailChimp page where you can register. We don't charge for our sessions at all. And so if you want to follow what we're doing, we've already done half of the major arcana on YouTube, so you can find that playlist and any of the tarot videos that we've done already. Tomorrow we're going to do everybody's favorite, death, card number 13.
Oh, it's such a good one.
And that will be epic. And so, for our friends in Australia, that will be at noon on Tuesday, your time, but it's at 8 p.m. Monday, East Coast time in the U.S. And
Such a big card. It's such a big card.
Yeah. So anyway, we're talking about the invisible forces in your life that are unchanged since the beginning of our species and will be unchanged until the end of our species. And they are everywhere and always the same. This is why the tarot is unchanged in 600 years. I mean, other than people having different approaches to the same energies, but the energies themselves have not changed, and they've been largely agreed for 600 years. So there's something to that. And so anyway, Sean Smith says, yes, number 13 is nihilism activation. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, but we'll be talking about that tomorrow night. So,
yeah, that's one facet on a disco ball, which is a good one.
Right. So I need to stop now because I have no voice.
Your voice,
left.
yeah.
And we'll talk again next week. And let's see, we still have several pages of Dr. Eisenstat's essay. We have 2 more pages to go. And I don't know how long that will take me to get through, but we're using that as a starting point for the things we want to talk about each week. So we do this at 8 a.m. every Sunday morning, U.S. Eastern Time. So obviously, if you live in the U.S. West Coast, this is not for you for live stream. We're doing this for live stream for people who live in Asia and Europe, especially. And that's why the time for it. So anyway, peace. I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks everybody out there for being here.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. This is, we still have, I think it's 20.
Oh, excellent.
26 people still online here live. So,
and please do use Skip's admonition to use the panelist piece. It's more the merrier of good ears and great work.
Right. Okay. So I create these series for specific purposes on this YouTube channel. So this Sunday morning series is specifically for discussing Jungian psychology in a basic way that will be helpful to people who speak English as a second language. And so that's the purpose of the Sunday morning session. That's part of it. The other purpose is to give a live stream to countries that don't have access to YouTube. And so they don't have access to the replay. So anyway, see you